Well, thanks for making time. Welcome onto the show. It's really exciting for me to connect with you. It's been years.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. What do you remember most about those years in Shenzhen? I mean, you went over there to build D.light with your friends out of school, not really knowing what you were doing, and out popped a major consumer products social impact company. I mean, how did all that come to happen?
Yeah, I mean, the time in Shenzhen was especially crazy because we had basically just raised a little bit of seed money, just finished up business school. Yeah. And my business partner, Sam, moved to India to figure out how do we sell this stuff and how do we figure out distribution. And I moved to China along with one of our other co-founders. His name's CN, and we just showed up in Shenzhen. I just had gotten married a couple years before, so my wife left what she was doing in the U.S., moved with me. She essentially was an unpaid volunteer managing HR and marketing. So it was a very much little family business we had going on at the beginning. And I think one of the things that, and there's so many stories I have from that time in Shenzhen, but I think, one of the things being in that totally different environment, it's like you can't even read or sound out the signs because they're in Chinese. It's not phonetic.
Yeah, you don't speak Chinese.
No, I didn't speak Chinese. My wife actually spoke Cantonese.
Oh, really?
But Shenzhen is a Mandarin-speaking area in sort of within Guangdong province, which is actually Cantonese. But Shenzhen is such a strange place because it used to be a fishing village, 250,000 people. They made it a special economic zone. And then, now it's a 15 million plus population metropolis where people from all over China came. And that's why it's a Mandarin speaking city, because that's sort of the language of China. So she didn't speak Mandarin. So she also felt like a fish out of water.
Yeah.
And we were there, just trying to, I remember even, getting cash. We couldn't set up a bank account. So I would have to pay for everything in cash. And I'd have to go to these ATM machines and get like these huge wads of cash because they had like their smallest denomination bill was like still pretty small. It's like $5 or something equivalent. So I'd have these massive wads of cash and I'd be stuffing them in my pockets and paying for things that way. So it was a very crazy startup experience and just working with some of the first factories, because no one wants to work with a startup in China. They want to work with like big professional American companies.
Scale.
They want scale. So it was really, as much as we had to pitch to investors, we had to really pitch to the suppliers and the contract manufacturers because they were taking a bet on us.
And the first couple manufacturers you worked with made other things. They didn't make solar products.
Yeah, they made other things. And we made some strategic errors too in some of the factories we picked. There was sort of a debate because we knew we had to create a product that was very good quality for rural families. And quality for rural families is a little different from what quality might mean for like an Apple store or something, because we don't care about how, accurate the color, Pantone scale is, but it has to be robust. The battery has to last a long time, et cetera. So we needed a factory that understood the quality side, but we also needed to get a factory that really understood how to cost optimize. And often those were very different kinds of factories. So the debate was, do we pick a factory that's really good at optimizing costs and help them build up quality? Or do we take a factory that's really good at quality, but then help them optimize on cost? So we kind of tried both of those experiments. And I would say that at first we bet on a factory that was really good at cost optimization. And we said, we're going to bring in our resources. We're going to help them on the quality side.
What did they typically make before you worked with them?
All kinds of weird consumer electronics stuff.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite toys, but it was things that you might see I'm trying to think of examples. Like it might be, some of it was lighting. So it could have been like a battery powered lighting device or, lights you might have in the garden and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they had other kinds of rechargeable electronics products, a whole range of stuff.
Okay. So they had some familiarity with.
They had some familiarity with it, and they had worked in some of our markets before, or not worked in them, but had supplied those markets.
Yeah.
But it was the kind of thing, and we had to build up that relationship. I remember in that process of doing that, speaking of random stories from China, there was one night I got a call from them like at midnight because they were just going to this trade show, the next day, and they need to record like their promotional video, and they needed an English like voiceover, and they really couldn't do it because they didn't speak English very well. So I went into this recording studio. It was like 1 a.m. at night, and they had this script, and it was just in terrible English. So I was like rewriting the script, and then I was the voice of "Welcome to," whatever I was saying, and created this video. But that kind of created that sort of trust and relationship. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we worked with them, and it was just a huge failure because we tried as much as possible to like help them with the quality standards, but it was sort of such a whack-a-mole situation, and where we'd solve one issue, but then it'd be 3 other issues. There just wasn't the mentality of kind of maintaining excellent quality through the whole process.
So you're building a company on a shoestring in multiple countries, spread across the world. You're just out of business school. You're trying to have your product have the highest quality of the highest standard. And you start getting some orders in, you start getting some major purchasing of your product, and problems start showing up. What do you do? And what kind of problems? I mean, did the products just not work at all, or?
The first run of products are basically unsellable. So we could not sell them and have our brand on it. The products just weren't going to last, as advertised.
And that's a huge portion of the company's capital at that point.
Yeah.
Is in the products that are purchased and
Definitely.
shipped.
So that was stressful. So, I mean, basically we had them, luckily we had another, like I said, we ran this experiment. So we did also have the higher quality factory. Now the problem was the cost was higher than we would have liked it to be.
Oh, you did it in parallel.
We did it in parallel.
That was smart.
Yeah, well, it turned out, I guess, to be, or maybe we should have just bet on the quality factory and not gone with the cheap one. But we had also a production run at the quality factory, and those products were good. We did sell those, and we were starting to get traction on those, and customers love that product. I mean, I even recently have interacted with customers in Northern India who actually are still using some of those very initial products made in like 2008. So, I mean, those products were excellent, and it was something we were proud to have our brand on, and it was really to help build that whole solar category, because at that time, people in these rural areas, they hadn't really interacted with solar before. So
you see them in the field even today. Sometimes.
Even today, they're a little held together with tape at this point. I mean, they're like 15, 16 years old, but it's amazing to me that they work.
How does that make you feel when you see that?
Oh, I mean, it's awesome. It's awesome seeing that, because we put a lot of hard work, sweat, and tears into getting those first products out. And that really kind of set the tone for the kind of brand we wanted to build and the quality we wanted to build. I
heard the story, or I read the story of your first shipment to East Africa, and something to do with a manufacturing or quality issue, but then you sort of lucked out by the skin of your teeth with an import paperwork mishap.
So that's another crazy story.
Can you share that story?
Sure. So this is more in the miracle category of where we got saved, because I don't think we'd have a company today if this didn't kind of
is it the most critical juncture in a sense?
It was so important. We were about to raise like our Series A. We just booked this container shipment to East Africa to an important partner. And this was actually products from the quality factory. So these are the good quality products, but this was our fault. This was a design issue in the code of the circuit that we had made a last minute change. And the change to that code, basically we realized, was a ticking time bomb that was slowly draining the batteries. So by the time the container would arrive in East Africa, the batteries would not only be empty, but they would be dead because they're permanently dead. Yeah. So, and the idea of like kind of reworking these products in Africa, bringing batteries there, we didn't even have the runway to do that. So, but meanwhile, we found out this container was delayed, and it was supposed to be in transit in Oman. And we found out, the distributor basically filed some wrong paperwork, and it created this mess. So we said, don't worry, we're going to handle the problem for you. So the container from Oman, we managed to get it rerouted back to China. We reworked them all at the factory, then shipped them out to the partner, and it all worked out. So
you're sweating bullets. You realize that this mistake has been made in the firmware, I guess, and then you don't know what to do. You don't know what to do. You're sweating bullets. And then by a stroke of God, this email comes that there's been a paperwork snafu.
Pretty much. we were figuring out how are we going to coordinate this with the partner? What are we going to tell them about the rework in country? But once we found this out, we just said, we will take care of your problem for you. We're going to have to reroute it through China and we'll come back to you. And she said,
because this is the first seed. I almost think of you as like, and D.light in general as like Johnny Appleseed for solar.
Yeah.
Spreading the seed of solar around the world and all of these remote and distant and rural places. And it's a great big world out there. When you add it all up of how many people are living without electric light still to this day. And you're doing the good Lord's work. You're Johnny Appleseed and this is your first shipment to East Africa, which has since become the bulk of the company's revenue. It's a huge market.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the epicenter of.
That's a good way of describing it.
Yeah. And so this wayward container filled with faulty products gets turned back around and goes back to.
And that never happened in the 15 years since. We've never had a container that's been rerouted in that way. I mean, it's a bizarre situation. So that's why I have to put it in the miracle category because it's just too strange.
But the determination and the entrepreneurial spirit to kind of make it right for that customer, which was an NGO. Speaks volumes to, because at every step over many years, there's been that standard of how to make it work for the distributor as customer, for the end use customer as customer. You've jumped through hoops backwards and you've done all sorts of crazy gymnastics, either in terms of capital raising or in terms of like in what was it, 2015 or 16, you had a real crisis moment, it seemed, with D.light. And I should mention for the podcast, I used to work for D.light.
So we've known each other for a while.
Many, many years ago. And I saw that from afar. It seemed like a real crisis moment. What happened? How did you, because you weren't CEO, you had put in a CEO, an older, I don't know, how would you describe Don Tice?
I guess if I kind of step back a little bit, around 2011, me and Sam, my business partner, we were feeling so burnt out, and that's something we can talk about. And I think that happens to a lot of entrepreneurs. I've learned a lot through that experience. Nearly burned out again 1 or 2 times through the course of it. But that was the worst one. And really kind of felt like, man, we need a CEO that has experience and can help bring this to the next level, because we could see the company was on the verge of, really scaling up. But we were just doing everything. I mean, and it was just completely unsustainable, the way we were managing the business. So we brought in a CEO, and, there's a lot of stuff that was really good about that. And I think I learned a lot from him, and putting in place like better structure, bring in place like a better senior team, or I'd say more experienced senior team, not necessarily better, but more experienced. And I think I didn't realize how I needed to evolve as a leader as the company grew. That the things that made me successful in those early days weren't going to be, successful characteristics in later stages.
Which is a really common story
with
entrepreneurs.
It is. And usually entrepreneurs kind of have to learn by, almost failing and then sort of course correcting and then adapting. So I learned a lot through that experience, but, as now we get to like 2015, early 2016, and the company wasn't in a good place. Actually, no, this was the early 2015. Wasn't in a good place. Really, the operating expenses had just gotten way too high. The revenues weren't picking up as much as expected. And there were a lot of sort of fundamental issues. And essentially, and I was president at that time. So I was working really mostly on launching this pay-as-you-go side of the business, which we can talk about. Which is
maybe just to help set the stage, like describe the scale of the business at that point in time, like how many customers had been served, or what revenues look like, or what, how much you were losing per month, or just kind of paint the picture of the relative scale.
So we were doing around $20 million of revenue per year, that kind of level, had reached about 25 million people with solar at that point. and really had become the brand and the leader in delivering these small scale distributed solar products that would enable families who are off grid using kerosene to at least replace their kerosene lamps with a better solution. And really at that point, we were mostly doing solar powered lights. Now we've expanded the product range significantly to be bigger home systems and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, at that point, it was mostly just these kind of solar lights, super affordable, super durable. And we were selling all across India, other parts of Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we were. I kind of had to step in a crisis, and initially was put in as the interim CEO. That eventually became sort of permanent. And I think at that point, I also sort of realized that there was a lot, even though, I had been burnt out before, I learned, I think, what are the things that did burn me out. So I learned how to manage the business in a way that wasn't going to repeat that from happening again, although we did go through a lot of other stressful periods. So I definitely skirted with burnout, a couple other times. But I found ways to recharge myself, which is important. Yeah. And I also gained some more both confidence and self-awareness. Confidence in the sense that, there are things that I felt as a founder, I could see where the market was going. I could see what we needed to do. It was clear to me. Whereas bringing on an outsider, it wouldn't necessarily be as clear to that person, even if they have a lot of experience. So there were unique things that I could bring. And also the humility and self-awareness to know I am not good at some of these other things, and I need to surround myself with people with really good capabilities in XYZ areas, and delegating to them, empowering and, trusting them, while also having some checks and balances around that too. So I think I had kind of come into that level of kind of more maturity and self-awareness over those years where I wasn't in the CEO role, and that was helpful. Yeah. So when I stepped back into it, even though it was a crisis mode, we had basically, at that point, we were burning, we had maybe 3 months of runway left in cash. We were in default on our loan covenants, so the banks could have pulled the plug on us at any moment and just basically wound up the company. Investors were nervous to put in any more money in. So we had to really first...
You're bleeding cash, you need capital.
Cash. And, basically on my first day, I had to do layoffs. First day as stepping as CEO, we cut fixed OpEx in half for the business within a month, which was intense. But the team really rallied, and there were some things we had to do to survive. There was a product we had to launch within the next, 60 to 90 days. So all, bandwidth is on launching this product with the key partner.
Your biggest distributor client was demanding it.
They're demanding it. They were going to drop us unless we launch this new product with them. So we had to get it.
So you're there. Like, half the team is fired,
right,
and those that remain, we need an entirely new product in a few months.
Yeah, which is insane.
Which is not how long of a product cycles, like years, typically.
Yeah. So that was insane. And then we had to make sure the banks didn't pull the plug on us, and we had to convince investors to give us a little bit of capital to kind of tide us over. So we basically got the company profitable. We're able to secure some, internal investment, able to get the product out. So we were able to navigate through it was an insane period. It was very stressful.
Yeah.
Much more stressful than starting the business. Cause there we had a lot more to lose in a sense. We had we did fire a lot of the team, but we had a lot of people still working for us. And we had a lot of customers. We were actually impacting a lot of lives every single month we were operating. Hundreds of thousands of people were getting access to light. And if we went under, that all goes away.
Yeah.
So, and we were, for better or for worse, we were really seen as this sort of, a real example of a social enterprise that was successful.
I would say iconic.
Yeah.
D.light is an iconic social impact brand. In some sense, defined the genre. The genre wasn't all that well established prior to D.light.
Yeah. And, honestly, I felt so uncomfortable about that because I remember in the early days, we were getting so much positive press. It was weird how much, because we weren't making an impact back then, but we were getting a lot of press, which helped us.
You had impact imposter syndrome.
I had very much impact imposter syndrome because we didn't achieve, we set out this goal. We want to reach 100 million people by 2020. Maybe we had touched we hadn't even gotten 1% of that, when we were getting the press, and I felt like we were sort of being heralded as solving the solution when we were like having so many problems, and maybe we'd run out of cash in 3 months or this. So I felt like it was unwarranted getting all that attention. So we were kind of put on that pedestal. Ironically, later, as our impact has really gotten to that scale. I mean, we're at 170 million lives today, which is insane. It is. It's crazy. And then like the press attention stopped. Like once we actually started making the real
170 million people at the base of the economic pyramid have solar, electricity, and light.
Yeah. And it's something that it's hard to believe, like when you hear those numbers, but I know going out into like rural parts of northern India or Kenya or Tanzania, Nigeria, you will see D.lights everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
So it is, it's cool. If anyone listening to this is going to be traveling in sub-Saharan Africa, go out, check out the rural communities and see what you find.
Yeah.
You'll probably find solar products, and you will probably see D.light products out there. And that is a very surreal and humbling thing to see that. And it's awesome. It's very exciting. So, now that we sort of achieved that level of scale, there's this weird inverse effect on the press where
now you don't.
Yeah. I mean, we get some, but it's, the amount we got in the early days was it was so crazy when we actually hadn't done anything yet.
Right. Well, it was an interesting moment. I mean, timing is everything.
Yeah.
And because that idea was so captivating and hadn't been formed yet, there wasn't an iconic brand championing that idea. D.light could be that brand.
Yeah.
Could occupy that idea in people's minds. And also financially, in terms of capital raising, it was 10 plus years of zero interest rates.
Yeah.
So
right.
It was a phenomenal time to go experimental with venture capital. For venture capital, traditional venture capital to be like, yeah, well, why not? Let's try the developing world. Maybe we can. I think that would be much harder if rates weren't, if it wasn't sort of a long bubbling era of essentially free money.
Yeah. I agree.
To take that risk and to try something new. So it's great timing. And thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
The impact that has been had is incredible. I have so many questions. One question is, I mean, when you took over and just in general, there's this constant tension at D.light and more broadly within the space around for-profit versus nonprofit or social impact. And, there's venture capital dollars expecting high returns. There's people involved in this sector for so many different reasons. Some more on a mission and religious in a religious sense there to serve, and some because they see sort of a strict rational argument that there's a profitable business venture here, and others are excited about the technology and the technology advances and the technology curves, and others want an adventure in life. And there's so many different types of people and reasons people come into this space, and you've run this company and managed all of those different motives kind of under one roof. Where do you fall in all of that? And how have you wrestled and grappled with those tensions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for both, I can speak for myself and for Sam, my business partner in this. I think we've been very mission driven from the start. That's what really excites us. And when we were starting out, we were really kind of debating, should it be a for-profit? Should it be a nonprofit? Should it be as like a strange new legal structure? Because there were some, different ideas around that at the time. And ultimately kind of the lens was, okay, we know we want to get to 100 million people at least impacted. That was our goal. So what's the mechanism to that? And we looked at sort of the nonprofit model. We didn't think we'd get that level of scale in that model. And fundamentally, we felt energy access and bringing solar power and these kinds of solutions, it was fundamentally a market failure that was happening. The market should be doing this because what we were seeing with the cost, curves in solar and even with LED technology and battery technology, it was really coming to a point where this stuff should replace kerosene lamps. I mean, the fact that people were still using kerosene and spending At that time, it was $38 billion a year on kerosene for their kerosene lamps. That is insane. It's an insane amount of money on a solution everyone hates.
It's awful. It's expensive, and it's awful for human health. It's like 90% of the air pollution related mortalities come from indoor air pollution.
Right.
Kerosene and three stone cooking.
That's right. So, and you talk to people who are using kerosene. No one wants to be using kerosene. They want modern lighting, and then all kinds of opportunities open up once they get lighting in their home. Their kids can study for more hours. I've visited homes where the kid, you had this horrible cough. Now they have the solar powered light, no longer, having those health issues, or they can keep their shop open longer because they have a good light to illuminate their products and all that kind of stuff. So it's such a clear value proposition to the customer.
It's like a more than 10x improvement.
Yeah. And the payback period for these products is really fast because now you don't have to pay for kerosene, or this is like kind of that for that first product line. But it just seemed to us fundamentally it was a market failure, and we could price the product in a way that would make sense for the customer. We didn't need subsidy. We didn't need a nonprofit to fund it. So the market forces should be able to work if we're able to get to enough scale to get the cost right and get the quality right and all of that and figure out distribution. So that was our fundamental belief. And, if we've created that model where everyone's making profit in the chain and we're making profit, then we can get more capital to do more things and to keep expanding the impact, because that's how sort of the engine of capitalism works. And, the way I view it, it's like there's these like huge powers in the world of, the capitalist like system, the forces of entrepreneurship and ingenuity. And if you can harness those things and point it in a direction that's going to actually make the world better, that's like a lever for change that can be really fast.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking about how to get to 100 million people by 2020, for us, it was clear that for-profit model was going to make the most sense. But we also wanted to make sure we got investors around the table who bought into that vision. Now, and we're going to pull us into like going more upmarket or selling, products to campers in the US. It's fine to sell campers in the US.
Higher dollar value SKUs.
Yeah. Because fundamentally, you're going to have to design very different kind of products for that. You will not really achieve your mission if you're getting too distracted. So we were very clear on that. We were talking with investors. We were rejected by a lot of investors. Probably close to 100 investors rejected us in those early days. But we did find some that were excited about what we were doing and got kind of an interesting mix of, I would say, typical venture investors that were seeing this as sort of a long shot bet, and some impact investors, and a little bit more weighted to the impact investors, which ended up being good because we didn't realize how hard it was going to be. It was going to take longer than we thought. We had to end up building last mile distribution, which was not in our initial business plan, but distributors just couldn't reach a lot of these customers. We ended up having to build a consumer finance business. There's a lot of stuff we had to do. And effectively, we had to invest to create the market because customers were very skeptical about solar as a category. And being the first company to go into it, we had to essentially invest to build the category, and then other companies could come in, once we've done that. So I think having more patient capital that has lower return requirements was critical for us. And then over time, we've been able to migrate to more traditional commercial dollars. But even there, we look for commercial capital that still is interested in the mission of what we're doing. So that's how we thought about it.
A lot of those capital providers kind of came of being while D.light was coming of age as well.
Yeah, that's right.
That whole construct of social impact investing is relatively recent too. And what is allowing large pools of capital to be patient? Or is it just a moral stance? Is it a multi-generational wealth somewhere saying it's more moral to do it this way? Are there other reasons? Are there tax reasons? What is kind of enabling the construct of social impact investing?
Yeah, there's probably a lot of factors in that. And I know we've worked with investors. Some of them are family funds. So it's just if the, individual or small set of individuals that are stewarding that capital want to, have that impact, they may not care as much about the financial return as the social return, you could say, on that capital. And definitely there's been funds we've worked with that are of that nature that have had that patience. There's also, funds like Acumen Fund, where they essentially take, for a lot of their funds, they take money as grants and they say, look, we hope for a 1x return, or maybe 1x, 1.5, 2x, and then we're going to recycle it into other impact funds. So they kind of, on the face of it, saying, look, our primary mission is this impact, but we think, we can be that patient capital. And Acumen Fund was one of our very, very first investors that believed in us and invested in us before we really even had a single sale.
They've been with you from the... Yeah. I think it's fair to call them the first social impact venture capital fund.
Yeah.
Out of New York, and have raised hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Iconic,
and they're amazing people.
Brand.
Yeah. So it's a range. And then you have also, funds that do have like stricter ROI, return on investment requirements, but they do have, this impact mandate from their shareholder base, and that might be public funds that also have, that are earmarked for a certain kind of impact, but they also need to make some minimum level of return. So there's a whole range of this stuff, and it's it's complicated in that way. But I would say in general, like the public consciousness to the idea of, wanting investment dollars to have, first of all, not do evil in the world. That's sort of like, it's been a first kind of threshold. And then secondly, how can it be generating a positive return in the world? I think is increasingly on the mind, especially with younger people. When I look at business school, when I was in business school, in 2006, 2007, there were a handful of us who were really interested in starting a social impact business, but it was a handful. There was a social enterprise class. I think there were like 12 of us in it, which was great. But now, I go back and visit some of these classes, and they're oversubscribed. They have, there's like, everyone wants to figure out how to be involved in this and find how to integrate purpose into their work and, feel like they're being part of the solution. There's a lot of big problems happening in the world right now. We all can see, and we all can see too that entrepreneurship and technology, these things can be forces for harm, but they can also be forces to really make the world better. And how can I use my time and resources in a way that's going to point things in a better direction for humanity rather than just maximizing my own wealth. And I think people are seeing that sort of pursuit of just wealth maximization for themselves and their family is kind of being empty, in many ways. It's not necessarily evil in and of itself, but it's just, it leads to a place where I think people really wonder, really, is that all that it's about? And and
ultimately isn't as successful. You built a whole company here. And are a successful individual. And so by taking this taking this approach, you've built something more successful than if you hadn't. So it's, I guess I'm curious, I'm curious about your perspective on capitalism in the developing world. So one view, and Bill Gates is always sharing charts from, our world and data that show tremendous secular declines in any measure that matters, whether it's, increasing literacy rates or, decreasing amounts of people who don't have energy access or, less child mortality or, it's just a whole range of metrics that look great over the last 30 years. Typically defined around extreme poverty, $2.50 a day. And then there's a counter view that's a bit of gamesmanship around the data, and that capitalism isn't really helping the developing world that much, that we're fooling ourselves, or we're sort of overly embracing the idea that capitalism is great for everything and everyone, when perhaps it's really good for the top and not that good at all for the bottom. And so there's two ideas that are in great conflict with each other. And D.light, and really all social impact, is designed to leverage capitalism as a means of incentivizing labor and capital to make things and move things and, put solar on people's roofs and all the things that are required to do that. So I guess I'm just kind of curious as to your stance on how you've seen the developing world. I know it's way too broad of a title, but how you've seen it changed and how you personally feel about that conundrum. Because you've spent more time in these environments than most, certainly. You've seen, and that's a gift, that you've seen so much and you have a perspective as a result.
Yeah. And, in some of these places, the, income inequality, it can be just really so stark too. And you see that, like the quality of life for people living in the slums of some of these urban areas, and, the people who are wealthy just have so much wealth. So, I can empathize with, some of the, I guess, counter arguments to the goodness of capitalism. I kind of see capitalism like I see money. I don't think it's inherently good or evil, but it's a powerful force. And I think it has uplifted a lot of people out of poverty. I see that. And when you look at some of the alternatives, like, let's say, purely nonprofit approaches or government kind of government approaches to sort of, subsidizing or providing a lot of these services, those have a lot of inherent issues there too. So there's not one system that really is going to solve everything. I do think there are some things that it is important for the government to do, and they're well suited for it. There's some things that really, they are more nonprofit issues. Just because D.light, we were addressing a market failure, there are some things that people just cannot afford to pay for those services directly, and you need some level of subsidy or a nonprofit to come in. But you can get jaded sometimes looking at some of how these nonprofits actually spend their money, and because their funding sources are often from donors, you have, a lot of their marketing effort and the customers they're designing for, the people donating money to them and sort of making what they are doing on the ground look good.
Their customer is the funder.
Yeah. And I have seen so many, projects in villages for wells or solar that are just dead after 2 or 3 years. And they're like decoration essentially in the village. And I'm sure the nonprofit who was involved had good intentions. They got a lot of good PR on it, but they haven't created a lasting solution. I'm not saying some nonprofits do kind of really work to create long-term sustainable solutions. And, it's the same thing.
There wasn't structural incentive to maintain or service or repair.
That's right. That's right. There wasn't. And I think on the for-profit side, you can get some of the same kinds of effects that happen, especially if people are looking at it really for a short-term gain. You see a lot of, I'll tell you with solar, for example, before we came into the market with solar, there were companies that were kind of fly-by-night businesses that would come in, sell solar, quote unquote, in the villages, but they were painted, solar panels that were like painted as solar. They weren't actual solar.
Really?
They did not work. But they had a little battery inside. So it looked like it might work for a couple days, and then it would die. So our salespeople at the very beginning, there were villages in Tanzania where they were chased out of the village because they thought we were those guys coming back to sell them more junk. It's like, no, this is solar. They're like, solar doesn't work. That's like nonsense, because we've heard that scam before. So, those guys made some killing on that, and then they, brought in some other piece of junk later on. So that's like example of capitalism that is not particularly good. But on the other hand, I don't think you could have, a company like a D.light, or if you look at, mobile phones and what that's done for people in sub-Saharan Africa, where they didn't have landlines, which is sort of this like more public money needs to come and do that. They just couldn't get that to happen. But mobile phones leapfrogged landline phones, and now everyone's connected, and that's opened up so much opportunity for people. You see GDP going up when people have phones. People are now connected with their families. There's all kinds of benefits people get. Or with banking, people didn't have bank accounts, but then they leapfrog banking and went right to mobile money, and that's opened up lots of opportunity for people to be more entrepreneurial and make income in different ways and send money back home to their family in the village without getting, paying exorbitant rates to get credit
without prior credit history.
And that's right. And then eventually opening up the door for credit, which is bringing them and, creating more financial inclusion. So there's a lot of, good examples that you can point to that really wouldn't have been possible without, I would say, those forces of capitalism. But it doesn't mean every company that operates there is doing good. So and I think one of the biggest challenges really is companies not Probably the biggest flaw in capitalism is externalities not being captured in the cost of their business, right? So if they're making a bad environmental impact, they're not paying that cost, the public does, and then they skirt that. And it's a problem here in the US too. Or you have, negative impacts on people's mental well-being, physical well-being, whatever, because the product is poisoning them or it's like addicting their brains, with social media, whatever it is. And those external costs are just not being paid for by the company. It's been paid for by society or by a group of individuals who are impacted. And I think if capitalism could better capture those costs and have the companies that are causing those costs, if they are captured, I think it would actually system work even better. But I think that's a key challenge. And then the fact that these companies have so much money, they can lobby the government, whether through bribing or lobbyists, whatever it is. So they can't be properly regulated. That's a problem. So I see all the problems with it, but at the same time, I do think capitalism as a force is super powerful for good as well, if kind of harnessed in the right way, and you have leaders of integrity who are managing the businesses.
Yeah, and D.light is an example of that. You're an example of that. I think the whole social impact sector is an example of that. My experience in that world for those years greatly informed my perspective around that. And it's a bit strange for me today in the contemporary, in the here and the now. There's polling, I think from Pew, it's like 50% of Gen Z believes in Marxism, prefers Marxism. It's a crazy high percentage. And I'm like, just so confused because I post things on social media sometimes that are essentially pro-capitalism, and people just go off the rails. They're really upset by that. And I just find it concerning because everything you're saying and then more, it can be used for great good. When you founded D.light, there's a religious undertone here. I'd love to get into your personal religious story and just your background a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
Your parents and your dad was Islamic. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Well, my dad came from Cyprus, so he's Turkish. Yeah. He grew up in sort of a Muslim culture, and he was always so he married my mom, who's a Jewish lady from the U.S., and so they both had to rebel, I would say, against their respective faiths to be with each other. They have a fascinating story because my dad was essentially when he was 16, he did an exchange program for a year where he got to live in the U.S. in Oakland at a high school. And barely spoke any English, but he was one of the top students in Cyprus, so he got selected for this program. And then that's where he met my mom, and they fell in love. And then my dad had to go back to Cyprus, do military service there for a few years. They didn't have phones or anything like that, but my parents would write letters to each other. And then when my mom was 19, she was at UCLA. She did a study trip, quote unquote, to Europe. She has the whole thing, but it was all this huge ruse. And she rerouted her flight to go to Cyprus and then showed up. And, I'm here, so it worked out.
Yeah.
But they really have an amazing love story. And but all that kind of going back to the upbringing. So I grew up, in a family that we did the Ramadan holiday, we did Hanukkah, we even did Christmas, we did all kinds of stuff.
So your mom was secular. Jewish, and your dad was Islamic, and so you would celebrate all the different.
We got all the holidays, but then didn't do any religious stuff. So I was raised very secular. My parents very skeptical of organized religion, understandably.
Okay.
And I grew up as basically my worldview is very much atheist growing up, and I was one of those people who. I wasn't sort of a passive atheist. I like to debate people about it. And I was very confident in my worldview, I guess I would say, as a teen. And I was also really into science. So growing up, I just was, in a way, I kind of got some of that religious experience from learning about the vastness of the universe and the cosmos and all of that sort of thing. But I had a very sort of naturalistic, materialistic view of the world. And that started to change initially when I was in college and had various experiences, which I can get into some of them, that really made me question that view of the world. It's there seemed like there was something more going on to purely.
Yeah. What changed? And there's a quote. I think it came from a talk you gave, but Werner Heisenberg, that the first sip of the glass of science,
Yes,
will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the cup, there's God.
Yes, that's right. So the first sip from the natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you.
Yeah.
So I very much found that to be true for myself. And, now I don't see, like with science and faith, I see these things as very much compatible with each other. Whereas before I just couldn't see that link. Part of that's also new things science is uncovering, I think, is making that even more apparent.
Is that what changed because you found Christianity at 20 something?
Mid-20s. So I would say it was a long journey to get there, because Christianity, if I would have picked like on a list of religions what I might be, if I wasn't atheist, Christianity would be like the bottom of the list, at that time. It just wasn't even in my radar. So it was a long journey to get there. Really, first for me is sort of moving from a perspective of atheism to being open to theism, that there is something more going on. And so, some of the things that happened to me, one was a pretty like dramatic experience, because when I was my first year in college, I'd been going through this like really bad depression. And that had been going on for about a year and a half. And it was sort of inexplicable, because I was always a really happy kid. There wasn't anything that necessarily that I could see that precipitated it. But, I would just say it's like almost like the whole world went to black and white for that period. And it was just, everything felt really heavy. And I tried seeing some, therapists about it. I had some medication I was taking, but it felt like it was almost like papering over the problem. And there was one night where I was feeling really down, and I can't even tell you why I did this, because I never had prayed before, but for whatever reason, in that moment, I prayed, God, please help me. That was like the entire prayer. And I felt at that moment, this like physical, force on my chest. And I remember being very surprised by this. And I was sort of stunned. And at that moment, that cloud that was over me, whatever it was just, it was gone. And I stopped taking the meds after that. And it never came back, whatever that was. So I would say I was, hardcore atheist before that. And then after that, I became agnostic. I was like, maybe there's something else going on. Maybe my brain tricked itself, but maybe something else actually is going on, and I just don't know. So that was sort of, I became open to it. And I think, my dad passed away when I was in college. That also made me at least think about, some of these deeper questions.
Is that what triggered the depression? Or?
No, that was after. It was after. And, I thought like this, I'll probably spiral into it again, but I was sad, and it was grief, but that depression was something different, is all I can describe it.
Yeah.
So it was really in my kind of mid-20s that I decided, I really want to figure out what this spiritual stuff is. Like, is there something behind it? And I explored like meditation. I had a good friend who taught like Buddhism classes, so I got into that and just started reading various scriptures. And I started experimenting more with prayer. I said, let me just, it seemed to work with me that one time. So I just experimented, and, if anyone else is like kind of a sciencey person like me, I think it's fine to do that kind of experiment and my prayer was, God, if you're real, tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. That was it. So I just experimented with that. And there were interesting things that kind of came out of that. It wasn't like the same thud experience. I haven't had
found a company named D.light.
It wasn't that clear, but I will say I started to feel these like nudges to certain things that were counterintuitive. One of the first things was, you should no longer eat these kinds of foods, and which was like very also weird and not something I was expecting. But so I cut out like beef and pork and all that stuff. And actually my energy levels went up a lot. My family has a big history of like heart attacks, like really young, but my cholesterol's been kind of in control. So I kind of think maybe that expanded my life or
is
whatever
that
it is.
How your dad passed from a?
No, it was a car accident. Oh. Yeah. It was sudden, but he did have a heart attack at 40 and had, issues on that stuff. So I have, the Tozun men don't live that long because of the heart stuff. So really past like the 40s or early 50s, like there's not really many Tozun men that have lived that long. So, but I think the way kind of my lifestyle is, I expect to live a long life.
Do you think having that clock in your head, it sounds like you have an expectation that you're not going to live past 50, has greatly sped up your determination and drive as an entrepreneur? Do you think you've had an accelerated internal time frame?
No, I actually think I'm going to live a while.
Okay.
So I think it probably did shape it to some degree, like a level of urgency, just seeing that. But I'm just sort of a naturally optimistic person. So I feel like I'm always the one that's going to buck the odds.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so anyway, so you start, I mean, these are born again, described experiences. Yeah,
they were very mystical. It wasn't sort of through the rational. I mean, I kind of did that route also, in the sense that made me even more curious about what is the rational argument for there being a creator or a God. And I just started getting very interested in that topic, and it started to feel very real. And then I guess the way I thought about it was, if this stuff is happening to me, surely it's happened to other people and other people in history. So I can learn. It's not, I don't have to go on this quest just purely individually. And really it was when I started reading the Gospels that and hearing the message, that Jesus taught, I realized that this is the God that I've been interacting with. It feels like it. And
you felt the truth of that.
I felt the truth of that. And I started interacting with others who had gone through sort of a similar experience with me, experience as me, who became Christians, and just learned about their experience. And I think I had such a negative view about Christians being judgmental and, anti-science and hateful. I mean, the kinds of things we kind of absorb in popular culture. But the kinds of people I was meeting were just so different from that.
We're not that.
They were not that.
Yeah.
And I realized, well, I'm getting a distorted picture here.
Yeah.
And there are examples of Christians who do terrible things. I don't deny that. But
the media's stance on traditional religion, Christianity especially, is like the end of a 600-year arc that started with the Reformation. The humanist the seed of humanism that Luther put on the wall of all the churches and caused hundreds of years of bloody war. They kind of anticipated that was the end result of those seeds, a sort of inherent atheism, not like by the media as they would call it at that time, but they were aware that it was going to go in that direction, which is why they fought so hard. They being the Christian church, against Lutheranism. Anyway, I was listening to a podcast about that the other day, and it kind of struck me as like, because the media is just very against traditional religion in many ways. Well,
and I think it's been interesting also kind of having a little bit more of a global experience too now, and seeing, because we always think of Christianity as being so European, but I mean, it came out of, Jesus was Jewish. He was a rabbi.
Yeah.
And I think that was mind-blowing to me. I didn't realize that. And was very steeped in these Jewish traditions.
Yeah.
And was very much like seen as this Eastern religion, coming into Europe. It wasn't like a European invention. They adopted it. And then when you see sort of Christianity's impact when it's really absorbed in these local cultures, whether that's, in India or Africa or parts of China that I've been to, you see like the transformative impact it has on people. And it's just, it's awesome. And it's very different from like, as you said, that kind of, maybe narrow media view we get of, some Christians behaving in bad ways. And I think the other thing that was eye-opening to me too, is just seeing, when you have sort of any religion in sort of the dominant part of the culture. And it's not so much here in Silicon Valley, but other parts of the US, maybe that's true. But, whether it's Islam or even like Buddhism or other ones, when they're sort of become the mainstream and it's just sort of the default, they often get fairly corrupted. And you see like, a lot of violence being perpetrated, even by, in Myanmar with the Buddhists, who are in power. And has nothing to do with Buddhism as a religion, but it's sort of human nature coming out. And atheist regimes, like Stalin's, whatever, they were very much and they did terrible things. So it's more of it's a human problem. And we can't sort of throw out everything about these belief systems just because some of their representatives may not be great examples. I think we should expect that with anything that becomes, has enough critical mass and enough people and institutionalized to a degree.
So this became a part of your being, your soul. And I mean, you see the fingerprints of this. It's funny, when I worked at D.light, I didn't realize this. I didn't actually put two and two together, even though it's quite obvious in retrospect, how shaped the mission and even the name D.light comes from scripture, right? Delight in the Lord. And, that like you weren't advertising or proselytizing or whatever the right word is there. It wasn't like if you work for this company, you're on a mission, like a religious mission. But your personal motivations were that, and that's what you were bringing into the DNA of this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I could say if I hadn't had that sort of spiritual journey, I would not have gone on to start D.light. I mean, it was really clear to me, like one of those nudgings or callings I felt was not so much to start D.light, the company, that kind of thing, but I really felt called to, for one thing, I found I really loved entrepreneurship. That was like an interesting discovery for me. But then I wanted to find a way to leverage that in a way that would be a blessing to the world in a more meaningful way, not just like I said, for wealth generation or anything like that. And I think especially for people in emerging markets, because it felt like there was so much technology and capital that we had access to here in Silicon Valley. And there was a huge gap of that not bridging over to people in emerging markets that didn't have access to this kind of cool stuff. So I really felt I needed to go to business school to figure out how to do that. And specifically, there was a lot happening at Stanford at that time. Now that's in so many business schools, but at that time, and there was the design school there. They had this program called Design for Extreme Affordability, and I just was so clear that I'm meant to do that. Like I have to get involved. So I only applied to the business school program there, it was such a long shot, and I got in. And then
nobody only applies to Stanford Business School.
Yeah, I only applied there, and I figured if it's not meant to be, I'm not gonna. Yeah. It's fine. And my wife, we'd just gotten married, and she was like very opposed to the idea of me going to business school because it's like to her it seemed like selling out, and it was like businesses are evil. And I was the one protesting businesses in college. I mean, it was not like super pro business, but I really felt, this entrepreneurship thing was really amazing and had this power. I love creativity and, taking ideas and making them come to fruition in the world. And the idea of trying to do that at scale that could impact people's lives in a positive way, I just felt that was something I was meant to do. So,
and you didn't get into the Design for Extreme Affordability class
No. So it was so weird because I was there. I was like, my whole purpose here
is to go to this class.
That was like clear. And actually I was really into music and songwriting, but that was another thing. I said, while I'm at business school, that will all stop. I was just clear. I had to be very focused while I'm here at that time. And my wife and I, we also like made this pact that we would cap our salary at the first year after business school to like, they publish a range. We would cap it at the lowest end and give away anything else. So we wouldn't be clouded by money because I knew I could be tempted by that. So, but anyway, I was like, so design class, that was the purpose I was there. I didn't get in. And it was ostensibly because they were prioritizing second year students or first year. But to me, I thought, well, I'm not going to have time then to start the thing. Yeah. So I didn't know what to do about it. So I just kept showing up to the class. I was just so sure the purpose of me being there was to be in this class. And one of the only other first years in that class was Sam, my business partner. And so I keep showing up. After 6 weeks, they finally let me in because I'm just so obnoxious about, I'm just going to keep being here. I'm like, okay, fine. So they let me into the class, and that's how.
Wasn't there another D.light founder that wasn't accepted into the class, but ended up there somehow as well?
Yeah, that was CN, and he had a little bit of a similar story where he just was like, "This, I really feel like I'm supposed to be here," and he. I think one day he had worked up the courage to like ask the professor, if he could be in the class, and they were like, okay, fine. And so it was both of us.
And D.light, is a real feather in the cap of that class and the design school in general. And it's a nod. D.light is a nod to the D school, but it's a bit crazy that multiple of the 4 or 5 founders weren't in the class, but just sort of like hustled their way anyway.
But to their credit, they let us in. So they can't take credit because they did let us in.
And your mindset was like, I'm going to try to find business partners in the first year of business school.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to build the business in the second year of business school.
Yeah.
And so if I get into this class in the second year,
it's too late.
It's too late because I need to find the business partners. What was going through your mind in terms of identifying suitable business partners? How do you, was that just an intuitive exercise, or were you?
Yeah, I had no criteria, but it was all intuitive. But I know with, the way they did it that year, they were just really starting this class. It started maybe 1 or 2 years before. So it was a little, I think they're more organized about it now. But after sort of like a lot of the human-centered design thinking projects they had us do, they were like, okay, now for the big projects, you're going to form groups. It's going to be on interest areas. Someone's really passionate about an area, they can write it up and people can kind of glom around them. And there was a lot of stuff around water pump stuff, which was interesting, which I was interested in too. But then there was Sam, who I kind of knew, but didn't know that well. He had spent the last 4 years living in Benin, was an American guy, but had grown up in India, Pakistan, South America. His parents were in development. Then he did Peace Corps. Very oddball, had all kinds of like earrings and, was dressed differently from everyone else. But that when you just interact with him, 1, he was different. 2, you just knew that guy was going to do something interesting.
I felt
that. And he was passionate. This isn't someone who was going to just, I don't know, sell out,
Yeah.
And he just wrote, I think, light on the board. And because he had this experience where, when he was living in Benin, his neighbor's son was burned in a kerosene accident. The kerosene lamp tipped over. There was a boy who was totally burned, ended up surviving, but took months to recover. And Sam realized that this is insane because we have technology that should replace kerosene. Like, why is this happening? Mm-hmm. So I said, I want to work with that guy. So I meandered over to him, and then CN, that other guy I mentioned, he meandered over, and then a couple other people, and that turned out to be the D.light founding team. Yeah.
And it's one thing to kind of do a class project at Stanford at the D school. It's another thing to then, after all that is said and done, and you get your grade, and you've got your 5 other classes going concurrently in the next quarter, to circle back and be like, we should all actually build that thing.
Yeah.
We should actually do that. How did it go from just a class project to no, like we're going to build a company?
Yeah. And the funny thing is, what I heard subsequently from some of the guys who taught the class is that we were probably like the least promising group because our prototype at the end was so crappy.
They let none of you in.
I know.
They thought you were the least promising. I don't know if their criteria is very reliable here.
Well, what we had was perseverance. I would say that was sort of the distinguishing quality, and continuous innovation. Because, if you keep improving and you keep working at it, eventually you will surpass all the other people. So that sort of was our one saving grace. But so basically the class finished up. It was the end of the spring quarter. Everyone went away for summer. Then that first week we came back after that summer break, we got in touch with each other and said, let's meet up. So it was like this tree. I remember we sat under, and we were all just saying like, yeah, let's figure this out. Let's do this. And we managed to scrounge up a little bit of funding from different parts of Stanford, to fund a trip to Myanmar, which there was a partner connected with the class we were going to do. Sam and I went there and basically spent almost a month during that Christmas break and over Christmas doing out in the field, doing prototypes, all that kind of stuff. And started honing the business plan, started putting together like a fake board of like really, because there were great professors there who had been on real boards. So like, just treat us like as if we're a company and you're on the board.
You started assembling.
We had no idea how to do it. Yeah.
You were like, you're on our board now.
Yeah, you're on our board, this fake board, and just treat it like a real one. And
that's kind of brilliant. That's a brilliant hack for a business school student.
Yeah.
To do that. Why not? Like,
why not?
No reason not to do that.
And we started doing all these business plan competitions. We started learning like how to refine our pitch. We did that pitch so many times. And then we ended up winning some of these things. And there was a big one that we won that was such a shock. Like, it was one of those business plan competitions that we actually didn't qualify for because we had to win our own school's competition, but our school was like announcing the winner later after this thing. But I talked to the organizer and said, yeah, but we have a cool story. You should just let us in. So for some reason they let us in. And then
this is Draper
Fisher Jurvetson. And then
famously funded Twitter and Tesla and SpaceX. Yeah.
Right. Not an impact fund.
No, not at all.
And then actually it was 1 a.m. the day before that pitch. I remember we were like working on actually some other school stuff. And then Sam or I can't remember which one of us, we messaged like, this thing is tomorrow. We're like, oh shoot. Because we had kind of forgotten about it and thought we were such a long shot for this thing. So we put together all this stuff. And then we go there the next morning. We're wearing like a nice, I think this is the first, Sam had to borrow a suit and he biked there and it was like kind of messy because it was like he biked over all this potholes. Anyway, we get there, we do the presentation. I think it goes pretty well. And we have like the kerosene lantern, we light it on fire, like smoke spilling out. So we were memorable.
This is like this lantern is from Africa.
It's from Africa.
It's the best prop ever.
Yeah.
It's
awesome.
It's very authentic and it's awful. Everyone sees just how noxious the fumes, the black smoky fumes are. Super like,
and the whole audience is afraid the fire alarm is going to go off, and it creates this whole sense of like, this is bad. I mean, so that left an impression. And then they said, okay, well, after the lunch, we're going to call the 5 finalists to present. We're like, and we didn't realize it was another presentation. So all the other teams were having these fancy lunches. Sam and I were throwing slides in the parking lot, pacing, doing our, practicing. And we end up, after the break, there's 5 finalists. D.light will be first to present, and they're up now. So we go up. I'm like so nervous. And I just say a prayer to myself, like, I am not an eloquent person. I was like terrified of public speaking back then. I'm better now. But just give me the words to say. And we just nailed it for whatever reason. We nailed that presentation and ended up winning the whole thing, which was a $250,000 check.
That was the first real capital.
It was the first real capital. And this is right
non-dilutive.
Before graduation. Non-dilutive. Well, actually they did take
oh, really?
It's equity. But it was on good terms.
Okay.
So we are just in complete shock and disbelief. It's a couple weeks before graduation. Then we're like, we're doing this. Mm-hmm. And basically that set things in motion. And I moved to China with my wife and Sam moved to India. And now we're, 16 years later.
You've been figuring it out ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of why I started the conversation back at the Shenzhen time. Cause it's, you just go over there and it's like, figure it out. Like, what do you do? Yeah. Where do you go? Where do you start knocking on contract manufacturer doors? Like, hi, can I see your facility? Yeah. Would you like to manufacture for us? Like, how do you,
I know.
What do you even do to start getting things going? I mean,
it was just like finding contacts who knew people who knew factories, and we made introductions, and it was, it had so many meetings with random factories, and eventually ended up finding the right one. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, what you've done, what the whole team has done, everyone involved, there's been many contributors over many years, and it's profound. 170 million people's lives have been benefited in a really material way, not in a slight improvement of convenience kind of way, but in a structural health and safety and longevity of reading hours and productivity and income generation and all sorts of really substantive benefits. Yeah. The impact is real. Let's go back to science and religion.
Okay.
For a sec. I'm going to kind of go that way because you did share before this conversation a sermon that you gave at your local church, and it was all about science and kind of compatibility with Christianity. You feel that they're compatible despite in earlier years of life feeling quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you stand on that now? And maybe tell me more about that. What's changed in your mind?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot that's changed for me on this front. I think, part of it is I had a distorted view of what faith was when I thought they were incompatible. And I thought that to, have faith in something that's beyond this material world or something that may have created it was sort of, rejecting facts and rejecting what we see in nature. And I think that that in and of itself is not true. I think, what I found is that science actually, and I'm still such a nerd with science. I love this stuff. When I was a kid, I thought for sure I was going to be an astronomer or in cosmology, a scientist. So I'm still continue to read up on this stuff all the time. I love this kind of thing. Just last night, I was brought the telescope and was looking at the moon with my kids because we saw the eclipse. So we wanted to see the moon with it. Anyway, so I'm into this stuff. And to me, it just adds to my faith and adds to that strength. The more I learn about the natural world, the stronger my faith is. And I think there's a couple angles to this. One is, I think people, whether you have faith or not, could probably relate to this, is just tapping into a sense of awe. And that's like a very human thing people have been tapping into for a long time. And when you contemplate just the vastness of the universe or like the beauty of it, you have that feeling where your hair stands up. In scriptures, it's often referred to as fearing God or having the fear of God, which sounds scary, but actually it really is that feeling of awe, the feeling of, they also call it trembling reverence is another way to kind of describe it. And when we get in touch with that feeling, I think it makes us more grounded. It can kind of make it gives us perspective that we're not the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And it helps us live happier, more fulfilled lives, honestly.
That word fear could be slightly mistranslated.
Yeah.
Like the God-fearing Christian, the Catholicism where fear is really kind of integral to one's relationship with God. I think you just said it, but in
the Hebrew word is actually called yirah. And yirah means it's awe or trembling reverence, because there's definitely a trembling aspect to it, but I think we all can relate to that when we just think about how vast we get chills and
it makes you feel. I feel that way in front of mountains. I went and did a number of big climbs, and the fear that I would feel inside wasn't a negative fear. It wasn't. It was an excitement, perhaps, or an awe mixed with an excitement, mixed with a fear.
Yeah,
it's that feeling and those experiences are the closest I've felt to godliness, not of my own being, but of the way that the world is.
Yeah.
It has that effect. So it's a really fascinating reframe on that way of thinking about religion, that religion, traditional religions, that God-fearing is an integral part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
When it could be a slight misinterpretation of the word.
That's right. And I think that, we think of that fear being, as you say, in that negative context, but actually when you read the context of all the scriptures, there's a lot that it talks about in Proverbs, for example, which is the book of wisdom, which is fear. The fear of God is the beginning of understanding, or the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And, that feeling of awe when we realize our place in the universe, that's where we can start gaining wisdom. I think that's so true. So I think that's one sort of path where the more you learn about nature and the world, the more awe you feel, at least for me, the more awe I feel. And the other angle is really seeing some of those fingerprints of, really design in creation itself, and kind of that this naturalistic sort of pure or mechanistic viewpoint of the universe is just, it doesn't seem to hold complete water. Like even quantum mechanics, what we learn about that, there seems to be a lot of room for free will, like within that, what we're learning about how quantum mechanics works, where it's not deterministic, that there's the probability wave and it collapses when there's an observer and all kinds of interesting stuff.
And it's
there.
integrated from negative infinity to positive infinity, meaning it's literally everywhere at any moment in time until you measure it. And then it consecrates to this particular, it makes no sense.
So it makes no sense. And it's so mind blowing and awesome.
Yeah. And the dark energy stuff, I mean, like the matter and energy that we have intuitive understanding of and see and feel and touch is 4% of the mathematical
dark matter, dark energy
and matter that exists in the universe. So as to make the equations reconcile for the acceleration of the universe that's measurable, it's empirically determined. Yeah. Like what? We only understand 4% of the universe? That makes no sense.
It's so cool. Yeah. And there's so much more stuff to discover, which is so cool. And then I think there's the kind of fact that, one, the universe actually has a beginning and that was like sort of a non-intuitive thing, because for a long time people just thought the universe is all that is. The universe kind of is God, but actually no, there was a beginning point, which is interesting. And then when you look at even things like the fundamental constants of nature and physics, which are, I mean, like, let's say with a number like pi.
They're fine-tuned.
Yeah, they seem to be fine-tuned. Like, so like a number like pi, we can figure out with a computer, but something like so it's a new mathematical constant. That's a different class of numbers. But then there are these physical constants of nature, like the speed of light or the force of gravity.
G,
G, the fine-tuning
the ratio of protons to the mass ratio between protons and neutrons.
Yes.
The relative amount of protons and neutrons compared to electrons.
Yeah.
If either of those things were different, electricity and magnetism would just completely be different.
Yeah.
We would have a completely different modality.
And to the point where unclear if life could even exist in those scenarios, if it's even slightly different.
The ratio between the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force.
Yeah, and there's about 20 plus of these, like just that were baked in from the moment of the Big Bang. A lot of scientists say these are essentially kind of random in the sense that if you had a multiverse, other universes, you could have all sorts of different values of these things. So the fact that these are so perfectly tuned to like sometimes degrees of like 10 to the 80th power, like it's not, it can't be random at that level.
Because some of them, like galaxies, wouldn't form. Just the density map of mass at the origin of the universe had to be such that there was enough variability of whatever was there so that things would amass around other things. Yeah. Kind of like air pollution like aerosols in the sky that form clouds. You need a certain amount of little miniature
clumps.
Yeah. And so then just the entire form, because otherwise it could be nothing or it could be all just one thing. Yeah. If that density wasn't just quite right.
Yeah.
Which there's so many things like that.
There's so many things like that. And then, that stuff is mind blowing. So I think a lot of times, sometimes this faith science stuff gets very centered on evolution, which is a whole other interesting topic. But I think it's, even if evolution and the genesis of life could be naturalistically explained, which maybe it can, maybe it can't, especially with the origin of life, I think the jury's out. But even if it can, the fact that the universe is sort of like baked in, and I almost think it's cooler if like the universe is like baked in with these fundamental constants that would naturally cause life to, to originate. I mean, that's like pretty cool design, but if there had to be interventions along the way, that's fine with me too. But I think the fact that you have the beginning of the universe, this fine tuning aspect, like those aren't things that necessarily are like the bedrock of my faith per se. But I think the more I learn about that, just the more awesome it is. And I think there is, a credible rationalistic perspective where you can believe there is something beyond this material world. There is an external creator. Yeah. And design and purpose in the universe. It's not all purposeless. It's not all directionless. Not all random. And that and human beings also are really special. And I think even though we're really, I talked about the feeling of being really small, but at the same time, there's something about human beings. That's one of the key things it talks about in scripture, that we're made in the image of God. Every human being, every life is so precious. And that's definitely something that motivates me in the work that I do, and just wanting to value everyone, and that everyone is important. And I think that's a key kind of underpinning of the Christian faith that was definitely very radical and revolutionary at its time.
Yeah.
And that,
arguably still is.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the fact that, we need to love our enemies, and it's just, we are a human family. I think that's a really important message certainly for today.
Yeah. Leading with compassion and forgiveness. And do you think we're alone in the universe?
Yeah, it's something I love thinking about this question. I do tend to think that most likely we are alone. I'm open to the possibility, of course, that there could be other stuff going on, but or other life out there. But I think the more I've learned, for one thing, you have like the Fermi's paradox in question: where is everybody? If life is easy, and life has emerged a lot of places, and civilization would kind of naturally emerge out of that, you would think we would see some trace of it somewhere.
Maybe it's in the 96% that we basically don't understand at all.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is, right? So, I think the door is open to stuff we don't understand, for sure.
Yeah.
But so I think there's that aspect of it's weird that we see absolutely no trace. And then, because you would think you would have, if some intelligence and civilization got big enough, they would be able to send at least probes or other things out. We would see something, but we don't see anything. And then the other aspect is, the more we learn about the earth, or even the genesis of life, there seem to be a lot of things that have to line up to make those things happen. So, you have the Drake equation, which kind of makes it seem like there should be lots of civilizations or life out there, where take the number of stars and the number of planets, and the chance that life would there would be an habitable zone, and et cetera. So you have this equation.
That's the Drake equation.
Drake equation, which, for a large value of range of each of these numbers, you should still have, because there's so many stars, you should have a lot of civilizations out there. That's sort of the logic. But what I think increasingly it looks like is some of these values might be 10 to the negative 100, or, some extremely low number where, there's new information coming out all the time. But if you look at Earth, for example, and as we're starting to look at more exoplanets, there's a lot of stuff with the Earth that's just really different and weird. The fact that we have, I'm thinking about the moon a lot these days because we just saw the eclipse.
Yeah.
But the fact that we have a really
the Easter
large
egg
moon
of the simulation that we're living in.
Exactly.
The fact that the radius of the moon is 1/400th the sun, and the same ratio distance Earth.
Yeah.
Is weird, because nothing else in the universe as we know of has that matching ratio.
Yeah. In our solar system, the only place you could see a total eclipse is here on Earth. Happens on average in any spot on the Earth once every 350 or 400 years. Just enough for it to be for humans to see it once in a while,
The spectacle.
The spectacle.
The intergalactic spectacle that
right.
only we have a seat to.
Right.
Strangely.
Yeah. So there's that aesthetic, amazing thing aspect of it. But then the way the moon got formed, where it's so big, stabilized our orbit, stabilized our climate, probably helps tectonic activity keep going, because Mars and Venus, they don't have tectonics going, and we need tectonics to have life and the carbon cycle and all this stuff. And the way the moon was formed with 4.5 billion years ago, there was this object called Theia, a Mars that hit the Earth. But if it hit it too hard, it would have knocked the Earth out of the solar system. So it hit it slowly at just this right angle, and then it formed the moon, and the moon is critical for life. But there's 100 things like that with Earth, that there are all these coincidences. And it may be that life is just super versatile and can evolve on much more hostile climates and stuff. So I'm not leaving it off the table, but I think
there is a lot more agency being understood within a sort of new age evolution genetics research that shows tremendous capacity for agency.
Yeah.
At every step of life. that's kind of, I think of it as similar to what quantum is to Newtonian mechanics. Horizontal gene transfer is to Darwinian evolution. Like so the capacity for a thing with under exigent threat to just like absorb genes from a completely different tree of life, just kind of pick them up and integrate them into its being. Science is showing that does happen.
Yeah, which is so weird and interesting.
Which is so weird. But that's like, how do those genes know? And how does that moth know? Or how does that bacteria know? Or even bacteria, like increasing its mutation rate under threat from antibiotics.
Yeah,
it speeds up its iterative attempt to survive under pressure. These kind of things are crazy in the context of what is the agency? What's driving what's causing that? And anyway,
I love thinking about this stuff. I mean, and even the fact that where the Earth is in the galaxy, if we were a bit closer to the center, we'd be hit by too many gamma ray radiation from supernovas. If we're too far, there's not enough heavy metals for life to form. Most galaxies don't have the metal abundance that would form. So we're in this sort of like special spot in the galaxy, especially so to me it seems. And then the fact that we don't even know how life started, and it may be that event, even with all the conditions on Earth, maybe one of these, one in quadrillion sort of things. I mean, so I think it is quite possible that we're it, and that's it. Which, I've heard kind of talked about in sort of this pessimistic view, which I think it sense it's kind of sad if there's nothing else out there, but in a sense it's just, it's incredible too. And it just shows how valuable human beings are. I mean, then the whole universe, like we're the most conscious beings, out there. It's such a responsibility to take care of the Earth, to, take care of every single life. When you think about how many stars are out there, there's around 200 billion trillion stars out there in the universe. So, a single human being would be, more rare than a billion stars. I mean, each human being is so precious. So we got to take care of, the life we have on this planet and the ecosystems we have. All this stuff is so precious. So I think it puts more responsibility on our shoulders in a way to not mess us up, not kill each other. And yeah, I think I like how Elon Musk puts it, which is to kind of extend the flame of consciousness, into the universe. I think that's a good way of putting it, but it does put it does give a kind of, I don't know, awe-inspiring feeling to me to think about that. Yeah. But who knows, maybe we'll find life elsewhere and that would be cool too, but that's sort of where I'm at now.
The deep sea, I don't think it'll be complex, or it won't be conscious life. It might be complex cellular life, but Europa, the moons of, is it Venus, or they're sending rovers that are going to be able to drill on ice lakes and go down to deep sea depths, which is a crazy engineering. Like, we have a really hard time doing that on Earth.
Yeah.
Let alone putting something on our oceans that aren't iced when we put them on the oceans and then go to extreme depths. But to send something up that far away, drill through the ice, go down deep, that, to me, of all the possible things, seems the most likely to yield some form of cellular life.
Yeah, and it might. I'm so curious what they're going to find. So.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think of on the climate change, protecting the planet, and I mean, what's the solution here? Is fusion where we have to go? I mean, how are we going to emissions keep going up? I'm pretty generally bullish around how fast the electricity sector is decarbonizing and capitalizing, and cost curves coming down. I'm pretty excited about all that, and the electric vehicle transition and all that is quite promising and exciting from my perspective, at least in like the OECD. But when you look at the whole picture, when you zoom out beyond just electricity sector mix, when you include agriculture, when you include manufacturing, and then when you include the rest of the world, the developing world that you know so well, like, the emissions picture just keeps going up.
Yeah.
Even if we do have a complete phase out over 50 years in the OECD, it's in the electricity sector. It's like, so how, in your mind, what do you think the way to go here is?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I actually quite optimistic for the long run picture, but pretty worried about the short run picture. And I think, some of the technologies coming out, like with fusion, if that really comes to scale, I don't think that's going to be for another 20 years. So we really see it scale. But, assuming they really crack it, you're going to have very cheap and almost unlimited energy without some of the downsides of nuclear. I think nuclear is still a good energy source, but fusion is incredible. If we can make that work, you can make desalination work, which can help for, water problems that we're going to have. And you can even use it to power sucking carbon out of the air, in much cheaper ways than we could do today. So I think fusion can paint a really bright future, but for maybe a couple generations down the road. And meanwhile, we have to decarbonize. And there's a lot of temperature increase that's already baked in. The temperature is going to keep rising, even if we stop carbon emissions today. So I think that when you look at sort of where money is being spent, there's about 66% of venture capital money today, at least in the US, is all going into transport, whether that's electric vehicles or, figuring out aviation or trucking, that sort of stuff. But transport is around 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's an important thing. But so you have a lot of capital going into that one area. And then you have some more venture capital, and most of the IRAs, the Inflation Reduction Act money, is going into making at least the US grid more renewable and decarbonizing that. Those are very important initiatives. And around the world, we are seeing more and more trends to decarbonize electric grids. So I think all that stuff is moving in the right direction. The cost curves in solar is coming down. I think this will happen over time, but it's going to take time. We're going to keep emitting carbon as we do it. And then, as you indicated, there's these other big sectors like food, ag, forestry. I mean, that's like another 25% of emissions, much bigger than transport, actually. And there is some stuff going on there, but very little amount of capital there. And there's a lot of innovation required. Industrial heating for making steel or cement, all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of CO2 and greenhouse gas there.
Yeah.
Concrete. Yeah. So I think there is a need for better capital allocation to some of these other areas if we're going to decarbonize faster. But I do think there's technology solutions out there and we can make it work. So I think we'll get there, but it's going to take too long. So then the question is...
And what does too long mean in that context? Sorry, the consequence will be too great for...
Yeah, well, I think that the more CO2 we emit, just the higher risk we're taking on, the more temperature we're baking in, essentially, to the temperature rise we're baking into the planet. We've already sort of 1.5 degrees, capping at that level looks very unrealistic. 2 degrees, we're trying to get there, but we're on track to blowing past that.
I think it's 3. Yeah, 3 is the new 2.
Which is frightening, because at 3, you could also trigger positive feedback loops, but they're actually very negative for the planet. But what I mean by that is you could have, let's say, the permafrost where that thaws, then you have lots of methane going out there, and that will accelerate the heating even more. So we might be triggering things that can
And are you
get us
confident
spiraled.
At the point at which feedback loops like that occur, like from your reading of models and science and stuff, you're confident that at this point, this feedback loop starts to take hold? Or
I think it's a risk equation.
Okay.
So, we don't know for sure, but the slower we transition, because even if we stop everything today, we might trigger all these feedback loops.
Right.
Still. But the more we keep going on the path we're on, the higher the chances we're going to get into this kind of cycle. So I think...
Just to play devil's advocate for fun here, because it's a podcast. Yeah. And I get to do this.
Yeah.
Temperature increase makes plants greener. More CO2 makes plants greener. Warmer world means more crop yields, more food, more abundance for, our civilized world. Another way to frame this is the issue that we're talking about is a geologic problem. And who's to say that another 20 years or another 50 years on the time frame of a geologic problem is make or break?
Yeah.
And I know that's controversial to say, but I'm curious to your thoughts on it, because I've struggled with that in my own head.
So I think that, on the one hand, there might be too much fear mongering on the side of people who are worried about this stuff, in the sense that this will be civilization ending. And I actually don't think that's the case, but I think there will be a lot of human suffering if we have this scale of climate change happening this fast. You're going to have some countries where they used to be able to grow lots of crops, now they can't. You're going to have drought, you're going to have famine. And yes, there may be some areas that now open up for agriculture that didn't have it before. So, but the net, I think, will be negative for humanity. I'll put it that way. But I think sometimes when people talk about it in these very apocalyptic terms, they can turn people off, because then, there is a little bit more of that nuanced picture. But I think, I could say with high degree of certainty that the more the temperature increases, the more suffering there's going to be in the world. It's particularly in emerging markets. You look at places like Bangladesh, and I've even seen some of the effects of this in sub-Saharan Africa, where you're having a lot of these climate effects. People don't know when to plant their crops. I mean, it's hurting people in the rural areas, and they're talking about it and they're feeling it.
Someone told me there's a temperature at which the water vapor content and the air temperature gets to a point where the human body just can't function. I forget what the number is.
The wet bulb number, yeah.
Yeah, but the Bangladesh was shockingly close to that last summer in core parts of Bangladesh near Dhaka. Somebody told me that. That's crazy.
Yeah. Northern India is a risk too for that. And
it's literally almost at the temperature at which
you cannot survive.
Human biology can't survive.
Yeah.
I felt old city, downtown Dhaka, not maybe at that exact temperature, but during extreme heat. And it is insane.
It's tough. Yeah.
Just moving and thinking and existing is a completely different feeling. And I've never felt anything quite like that. So human suffering goes up. Yeah, I mean, of course.
So, I think that we need to keep investing in these technologies. And I guess I'm skeptical a little bit on the policy coordination between countries. I'm glad that that's happening. It's sort of not my world. And I get very jaded when I think about it. I get more excited when I think about these step change technologies that can help. And we see this with solar and other things. Like
fusion. I actually think fusion's going to happen. The more I didn't think that I went to Stanford and studied energy systems engineering, and not once was fusion even on the curriculum.
Yeah, it seemed like such a pipe dream thing.
It wasn't even mentioned. It was just sort of a joke, like an afterthought.
Yeah.
And I was going down the rabbit hole of current fusion breakthroughs maybe last year, when they had net energy gain from the laser, which is a bit of a sleight of hand.
Yeah, but no, it's getting there.
Yeah, and what I didn't realize was that their fundamental mathematical understanding of plasma fluid dynamics wasn't matching reality in the tokamak, in the device that they've built, that they've surrounded with magnets and pressured and then hit with lasers, and hit the plasma gets 10 times the temperature of the center of the sun, which is crazy that we can do that.
It's insane that we can do that.
Like, how can we do that? How can we create something 10 times hotter than the center of the sun on Earth? What? And then they do that, but because of how complicated, because these are like unipole magnets, just single north pole magnets, all interacting in sort of really complicated mathematical ways where they get close and then they bounce and then they spin and they have torque, but then they also have translational kinetic energy, and all of that creates turbulence, and there are eddies within the turbulence, and there's all this like really almost impossible mathematical, theoretical and empirical understanding of the turbulence. And that's why fusion has stalled out for decades, because they basically didn't have either the theoretical framework or experimentation tools to improve the turbulence, because the turbulence is where they were losing all the energy. And so the ability to keep it self-sustaining, because sometimes those unipole magnets fuse, and that's what the fusion part is. And and when they fuse, some energy is released, so it gets a little bit hotter. And if it can keep getting just a little bit hotter, or stay around that point at every fusion interaction, then it's a self-sustaining reaction, but the turbulence is minusing out a bunch of energy. So basically, as soon as they can really figure out the turbulence part, they're actually really close, I think, to having self-sustaining fusion
and then
reactions.
It just keeps running, doesn't shut off.
And the turbulence part is a modeling problem. And I think the AI
absolutely
is going to help tremendously in that. And so I'm not as certain anymore that that we're 20 years out. I don't know, given everything happening with AI. It could be way faster.
It could be faster. Where I kind of am at on that, I think to deploy it at scale it'll still take time, I think. But maybe you're right. It could be 10 to 15 years if we're lucky.
Yeah.
But time will tell, I guess. But you're right. If we can really kind of factor in the AI kind of optimizations in this stuff and these, kind of work parallel, you never know.
And then we have fusion, and then everything. That would just change everything.
It changes everything.
Because energy would basically be free.
Yeah.
More or less. We're, close in proximity to the fusion plant. And then we could do whatever. We could make green hydrogen. We could desalinate water. We could decarbonize every aspect of civilization.
It is exciting if we can make that work.
Yeah.
So, So I think, like I said, long term, I actually am quite optimistic as long as we don't kill ourselves with rogue AI or, nukes or whatever it is. So I think we can get there with the promise of these technologies. The question is, in this interim period before we get there, what can we do? And my sense is we're going to have to figure out some creative solutions around, for one thing, continue to decarbonize faster in these other areas that are underinvested, but also decarbonization or taking carbon out. And I think, a lot of these carbon capture technologies are just way too expensive. But I think there's also some interesting innovations in tapping into natural processes, whether that's through like algae or diatoms, which are a form of algae, to essentially create little blooms by using phosphates or iron and then sinking them. And that would be something that could be done potentially at very high scale.
So sinking algae blooms.
Yeah. So basically the way it would work, there's these kind of desert areas of the ocean or also in river systems where you could essentially, if you seed it, depends on the area. Some of it's seeding it with iron. Some of it is actually pumping up deep sea, the nutrients in the deep sea up. Some of it could be seeding it with phosphates. So it kind of depends. But that can create these blooms. And with diatoms in particular, they kind of glom into each other and then sink. So you can get these blooms in theory and then sink that carbon back down. So I don't know if that particular technology will end up working, but if we can find some way to harness some of these natural systems in a contained way, that could potentially, sink carbon at the scale of gigatons for very cheap. So I think that's an interesting area of development. Then I think you have,
it doesn't float back up because the algae doesn't decompose down at the bottom of the sea, or
so once it gets to a certain level, my understanding is these kinds of diatoms will sink and kind of get to the bottom of the sea, some percent of them at least. So then you'll have a net sink of carbon. So this stuff still is being tested, actually.
Yeah.
So I think the jury is a bit still out. It might be easier said than done.
Does it change the pH value of the ocean? With
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Well, I think it depends also on what you're seeding it with. So I think we have to proceed on this stuff carefully.
Yeah.
We don't want to create another problem.
The unintended consequence problem with all geoengineering is like a huge looming boogeyman behind every door.
It is.
What's the third, fourth, fifth order knock on?
Yeah. But I mean, the reality is we are doing geoengineering already at massive scale. Every time we pump 50 gigatons or more CO2 in the atmosphere, I think we need to be, run experiments, be careful, but I think we can't ignore some of these possible solutions if we can find a way to deploy them safely and to experiment. I mean, I've heard another one recently. There's a company putting sulfur dioxide or wants to put sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere.
Yeah. To block or to increase the albedo.
Yeah. And that will, those last in the stratosphere for a year or two, and then they come back down. But you don't have to put that much SO2 at that level. I mean, it wouldn't cost that much. and you could reduce the temperature of the Earth by half a degree or a degree, has potential unknown side effects. So I'm not necessarily saying that is the solution, but there are solutions that are affordable.
We were accidentally or unintentionally doing that for decades. The entire global shipping industry was emitting SO2
and way more
from every boat.
Yeah.
And international regulations came into effect just a few years ago, eliminating SOx emissions from global shipping containers.
Yeah.
And it turns out those SO2 particles were increasing cloud coverage because they form as little bonding sites, and so they create clouds, and they were reflecting sunlight back up.
Yeah.
And so the ocean temperatures in the northern hemisphere have been like insanely like 5 standard deviations hotter than even just last year, which was already high. The numbers are scary. A lot of climate people are really scared by how quickly ocean temperatures heated up. But a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it does look to be from removing the SO2 emissions from ships.
Yeah, which is fascinating. Yeah. And the interesting thing about that, because the ships were putting out, let's say like around 10 million tons a year of SO2 or SOx, but they were going into the low atmosphere. But if you can
get it high,
you need a lot less of it. So you would only need 1 or 2 million tons a year into the stratosphere. Right. It doesn't actually get as much into pollution as it would the lower emission. Right. And you have, what I've heard is about 25 times more effective in terms of reflectivity in the stratosphere versus the lower atmosphere. So we've already been doing geoengineering, with the ships.
The unintentional, but the big thing is all geoengineering, this is the trolley experiment. This is the ethics of the trolley experiment. When it's unintentional and you're not involved and you don't have to pull the lever, it's okay. It's not an ethical problem. But as soon as, you put the trolley experiment there's all these people on the trolley and there's somebody on the track and, all the people are going to die potentially, or the person's going to die and you have to pull a switch to change the outcome of this trolley speeding towards the person on the track. And it's kind of a simple, it's like, why is that a difficult ethical experiment? Of course, you pull the switch so that the people on the trolley are saved rather than the one person. And it's like, right, but you're playing God now. And now you're killing somebody. Maybe it would have happened otherwise. But the second you make that choice, so with geoengineering, it's like, you seed the stratosphere with SO2 and crop yields fail in Myanmar or something because clouds form differently and people are, food insecure. That choice, that is the trolley problem writ large.
It's a great point. So I think this stuff is all fraught, but I do think we have to put everything on the table and explore all options because it may be doing nothing could create huge amounts of damage, especially if we start triggering these feedback loops.
Right, because the trolley experiment isn't just like a few hundred people; it's 9 billion people.
Right, it's all of us.
It's all of us.
Right,
and so it's. I actually wish they made the Trolley Ethics 101 class experiment the geoengineering thing.
Oh yeah, that would be fascinating.
It's way more nuanced, and profound in the exploration of the ethics.
Yeah. So I don't know the right answers on this stuff, but I just think it needs to be within our set of possibilities that we explore, because I think we're going to have to explore all this stuff if we're going to navigate through this climate crisis, with the least amount of human suffering possible. But these things are not straightforward, and there's definitely ethical questions, as you say, involved. I mean, we need to find ways for us to be confident enough for some of these interventions. There's many that are being proposed. I don't know what the right ones are, but to get it comfortable enough where we can make that risk calculation and who makes that decision. There's a lot of questions around that.
Do you think we'll see startups in the next 10 years that are geoengineering, VC funded, seeking to? Yeah,
I think we will. I mean, in a sense, we are already, like with, there's one company already that's VC funded that's looking at SO2 injection into the stratosphere. It's been a little bit controversial, but they're one. There's another one, and they're called Make Sunsets. There's another one, or many other companies in the kind of, diatom, algal bloom, looking into that world. I think that a lot of they're in the research phase and proving it out. So I think there should be investment in that area, but there also needs to be caution about wider scale deployment. So it's got to be, but we have to start looking at what are the solution sets out there, especially if things start escalating much faster than we think on climate. We may have to take some calculated risks.
Right.
So.
And then who decides?
And who decides? That I do not know.
Like that's a huge.
Yeah. It's got to be some international coalition, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah, because it's going to affect all of us. We're on the boat together.
Every international coalition, I think like America and a bunch of, and like Great Britain and Australia, and like a sort of hollowed out, yes, we're in it with you, but also not really.
Yeah.
International coalition. And then the perception of unilateralism, and then, it could be. Are you interested in, so you've stepped out from your CEO role at D.light. You're still involved.
Yep.
But is your head kind of poking back out, looking around? What else is out there? Are you looking for your next thing, or are you evaluating things like the algal bloom approach to geoengineering?
Yeah, I am starting to poke my head out. I think one thing that's been interesting, once I passed the baton on the CEO role about a year and a half ago, and the new CEO, Nick, he's doing great. It's been really fun working with him. I'm still pretty involved with D.light, but I kind of talk about it like, it's like D.light's my kid. The kid's gone to college. Kid still does laundry at my house sometimes, and it's still my life. Always will be in my life in some way, and that's great.
The kid's 16.
Yeah, that's right. So, and there's just enough stuff that because D.light is now such a vehicle for massive scale impact. So it also gets me excited because we have like some new stuff we've been launching, and when we launch something, it's immediately we're impacting hundreds of thousands or millions of people.
You have this massive distribution footprint.
We have a massive distribution footprint. And it's nice not to be the one, who's right, because that has another level of stress and pressure. So it has been fun supporting in this next chapter. But I am starting to think about sort of what might be next, and probably not ready this year, but I do want a little bit of a breather. But there's a lot of, I think, interesting areas in the climate tech space, particularly in areas that are sort of underinvested. And I'm, I think, really interested, and I'm already kind of doing work, with entrepreneurs that I like, sort of working with them, mentoring them, and that's really fun. But particularly entrepreneurs that are looking to, take a technology and leverage sort of investment capital and like translate that into like very large scale impact, whether that's on social impact or climate impact. D.light, interestingly, we do both those things because essentially we improve people's quality of life. But now that as we're enabling people to essentially leapfrog the grid from having no grid to now being purely onto solar, we're showing a path for how do we get the next billion people having energy access without also exacerbating the climate crisis. And it's possible because you don't have the legacy infrastructure.
Yeah.
The technology that's out there makes it possible. Creative consumer finance solutions also make it possible. That are leveraging digital money that's like really prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're able to leverage these kind of technology trends to actually show, no, you don't need to actually develop in this way where you have to like consume huge amounts of fossil fuels
and then finally
you could leapfrog it totally. And that stuff is cool too. Cause I really don't believe in this narrative that, in order to get to this decarbonized future, we have to really slow progress, slow development, especially in developing.
That's the tension at the big COP multilateral negotiation table, is like that tension.
Yeah,
writ large. But you don't believe in it.
I don't believe in it. Maybe I just don't want to believe in it. But I think that what we've shown with D.light is it's possible to actually have these markets where you don't have the legacy infrastructure. They can lead the way for the rest of the world, and show us how it's done. Because now, what's cool about our customers, they're not reliant on the utility or the grid. They own their own power, and that's empowering for them. And they also are doing it in a way that's not creating CO2 emissions, and they get to enjoy the same kind of stuff we get to have now. So I think that I do think these things are possible, and it's sometimes constraints create innovation. And I think if there's a way to kind of apply that kind of thinking, it's like, no, we still want the development. But now here are the constraints. So what are the solutions, and can we do this even better and cheaper?
Yeah.
And I think that's the way tech trends are going. It's possible.
Yeah, it's like, can we take or borrow or take the tech from the top of the stack?
Yep.
Can we take the best of the tech, not like 100 years ago tech?
Yeah.
Can we take the tech stack from the top, not from the bottom, and
exactly
and develop
like,
that
why
way?
do we have to go through that path?
I've felt that way for a long time as well about that particular issue. It's like, this is solar, lithium-ion batteries, and GSM connectivity, and all sorts of things that are at the vanguard of, call it, the last 30 years of tech. Do that, and don't do the stuff from the 18th century.
Yeah, totally. And that's I see that as very possible. And I have been really inspired, having a chance to work in sub-Saharan Africa, where you see that leapfrog happening in a lot of areas. There's a lot of amazing tech entrepreneurs there. The stuff they've been able to do with digital money, because basically when you go in, especially in Eastern Africa, even the deepest rural areas, people will have a phone. It might be not a smartphone, but it's a phone, and they have access to finance through digital money. They may not have a bank account.
I've met kids who have 2 phones.
Yeah,
and they're like hustlers.
They are. Yeah, I met kids like that too, and it's cool. It's very inspiring. And you see ways that they're more technologically advanced than we are here in the U.S. because they're not saddled with that legacy stuff. So I think there's opportunities for accelerating development and improving people's quality of life in a way that also factors in sustainability and climate. Yeah. Because we just have to. I mean, we can't keep developing like we've been developing. It's not going to work. Fair or not fair, you can say it, but it's not an option. So we need to think of better ways. And I think there are better ways.
I heard somebody say once, or read, I think from an LBNL report, that if everybody in India were to adopt air conditioning, that would be game over for climate. Just that additional. I don't, I'd have to go back and look at the paper.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's kind of that there's more than half the world still without air conditioning.
Yeah.
And air conditioning is a huge load.
Yeah. And that's actually a big area for innovation too, like super efficient air conditioning systems. And how can we, so that there's a lot of those areas that I think I would put that in the underfunded category, but if we can crack that, or refrigeration too, I just was meeting some entrepreneurs working on some really cool refrigeration design systems that are efficient, can work with solar, but these are the kinds of things that need to get cracked.
Yeah.
But it's doable.
Yeah. It's exciting. What excites you most right now? I mean, where are you?
I mean, I continue to be very excited about D.light, just it's really fun to I guess it's the kid going to college analogy. So I feel like proud of this thing that we've created, and that it has a life beyond me too. I mean, even though, I'm helping, but it's very cool to see. So that gives me a lot of joy. Honestly, my kids give me a lot of joy. I have 2 boys, and seeing them develop and grow into cool little people. That's been really fun. And I've been able to, I think since stepping back from this role, I've been able to get more time with them, which has been really nice. So that definitely excites me. And, I feel like in this phase, I've been able to fill some of that spiritual bucket, friendship bucket, those kinds of things. That definitely excites me. And then I do get really excited about, these innovations and technologies that have the chance for this step change improvement in the world. So I get a chance to interact with a lot of entrepreneurs. And when I kind of talk to one who's sort of in that similar wavelength and I feel like has something that's on that cusp, I mean, I just get extremely energized. So I'm sure I'll go and do something again at some point. But for now, I want to be in sort of helping mode. And that's been a really fun mode to be in after being sort of in that leadership role for a long time. It's it's nice to have a little breathing room.
Well, I feel like whatever it is that your determination, I mean, I'll just say, I think has a lot to do with D.light's existence still at this point. I think there's a lot of people that have contributed there, but you have a tremendous amount of determination, and you've brought that at critical moments to D.light's story. And I don't exactly know where that comes from. Maybe it's your religious background, maybe it's your childhood, I don't know, but you as an entrepreneur seem gifted in that way that you can show up and do what you can put your head down and kind of do what needs to be done and keep going despite all sorts of, stressors and rejections and, chaos and whatever else is going on. I think that's probably the most important quality in a successful company, entrepreneur, founder, CEO, more so than, people say this, like more, Y Combinator would say this all the time, that it has less to do with how somebody looks on paper or even the quality even the quality of their idea per se. The determination is probably the single most important variable in whether something makes it or not. And I don't know. I've just seen that in spades in you from afar. So whatever you do next, keep me posted.
All right. I will. No, I appreciate that, Ted. Yeah. Thank you.
For sure. I think we'll leave it there. Ned, thank you so much for this convo.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, sounds good. All right.
All right.